They say the mountains remember what men try to bury. Every stone, every tree root, every whisper of the wind carries a memory of blood, of oaths sworn in darkness, of truths too dangerous for the world beyond the ridgelines. And tonight, you are going to hear one of those truths, one that was never meant to leave the soil it was bound to. In the year 1870, in a forgotten hollow of the Appalachian Mountains, there were twins born into silence. Not silence of the forest, nor silence of poverty, but a silence that was forced. No neighbors heard their first cries. No minister christened them at the altar. No record kept their names. These children were hidden, raised in secrecy, as if their very existence was a violation against the world. Their parents, poor and deeply religious in appearance, were whispered to be something else entirely, keepers of a covenant not with God, but with something older, something buried under stone and time. The twins were not ordinary. Villagers who glimpsed them described an aura that made dogs howl and chickens refuse to lay eggs. They seemed to share more than blood, more than thoughts. Witnesses claimed they moved as one body, finished each other's words, even cried and laughed in the same instant, as though one soul was spread between two bodies. Some said their eyes reflected not the world before them, but each other's gaze endlessly, like a mirror inside a mirror, spiraling inward without end. At 14, when most boys learn the toil of manhood, these brothers did something that seared their legend into the marrow of mountain lore. In a clearing lit by torchlight, they were seen cutting their palms, pressing the wounds together, and reciting a vow no outsider understood. The words, half German, half Appalachian hymn, were said to bind not just their blood, but their very fates. The few who watched from the trees swore the forest greets, was silent at that moment, as though the world itself listened and recoiled. And from that night on, strange things began to happen. Livestock were found drained of blood. Travelers vanished along mountain paths, and the twins, once frail and pale, seemed to grow stronger, taller, more radiant, as if something fed them from the shadows. This is not folklore. This is not exaggeration. This is the beginning of a covenant between flesh and something unspeakable. A dark pact that history never recorded, but the mountains never forgot. You must understand, secrets like these do not stay hidden by accident. The story of the twins should have spread like wildfire, but instead, it was smothered. The local preacher who tried to warn his congregation vanished one night on his way to evening prayer. His Bible was later found nailed to the church door with no pages inside, as though every word had been stolen. Those who dared whisper about the boys suddenly became mute with fear or fled into the lowlands, never to return. The silence surrounding them was not natural. It was enforced. The twins themselves walked the mountain paths with a strange calm. Witnesses described them as tall, lean, and too symmetrical to feel human. It was not just resemblance. It was replication. They dressed alike, spoke alike, and even carried the same carved wooden staff marked with runes no one recognized. And when they walked through town, people swore their shadows stretched longer than their bodies, bending against the sun, reaching like black fingers toward whoever crossed their path. But here is where the truth grows darker. A traveling doctor, lured by stories of the strange brothers, tried to examine them. He measured their pulses, listened to their hearts, checked their eyes. What he recorded is preserved only in fragments, smuggled into an old medical journal. His notes claimed their hearts did not beat separately. They beat together, in perfect unison, one rhythm across two bodies. He wrote that when he pricked the finger of one, the other bled. He fled the mountains that very night, abandoning his instruments, abandoning his career, muttering only one phrase before disappearing forever. They are not two. The townsfolk believed the pact gave the twins power. Crops in the valley thrived only when the brothers passed through the fields. Illness spread when they were angered. A family who mocked them was found days later, their cabin burned to ash, their bodies untouched, lying side by side as though placed carefully by unseen hands. No one dared accuse the brothers, but everyone understood the message. This was not simple witchcraft. It was not folklore. It was power rooted in something older than scripture, older than law. And once you begin to recognize how power hides itself in blood, in ritual, in silence, you start to see the same pattern repeating, not just in 1870, but in every system that surrounds you today. The brothers did not just make a pact with each other. They became a living emblem of a truth the world does not want men like you to know. Unity is more terrifying than separation. By now, you've realized this was never just about two boys in the Appalachian backwoods. No, this was about a principle hidden in flesh, a secret force that the powerful have always known and feared. The twins embodied something forbidden, the annihilation of the boundary between self and other. They were not brothers. They were one. And men who become one cannot be ruled. They cannot be divided. They cannot be bought. The locals whispered that the twins had unlocked a mirror pact, an ancient ritual spoken of in fragments of Germanic and Celtic folklore. Scholars who studied the scraps found in the region connected it to a banned sect of mystics who believed that true power comes not from God or the devil, but from collapsing the line between two souls. In that collapse, in that terrifying union, lies the spark of creation and destruction. You might think this is superstition, but consider the evidence buried in plain sight. The twins were never recorded in census rolls, never baptized, never married. Yet every man in that valley paid them tribute, grain, livestock, even daughters offered in marriage. The families who complied prospered. Those who resisted were erased. The pact gave them something more potent than strength. It gave them psychological dominion. Fear bent knees faster than any weapon. And here is where the story shifts from eerie folklore into something that should concern you directly. Institutions, church, state, secret societies, took notice. The brothers became an experiment worth observing. Men in long coats and wide-brimmed hats appeared in the valley, speaking with foreign accents, offering the twins books, coins, and promises of greater power. These were not missionaries. These were agents, operatives of hidden orders that feed on anomalies, seeking to harness or destroy anything that breaks the rules of control. But the twins did not bow. They accepted the gifts, read the books, learned the languages, and yet remained loyal only to their own pact. One night the men in long coats tried to seize them. None returned. Horses came back riderless, saddles torn, reins covered in something that was not quite blood. The message was clear. The twins belong to no master but each other, and that terrifies those who rule. Because every system of power, religious, political, economic, depends on division. Brother against brother, man against man, individual against individual. What happens when two men decide to erase that division entirely? What happens when unity becomes more powerful than any crown or creed? That is why this story was buried. That is why you are only hearing it now. The valley changed after that night. What began as whispers of strange power became undeniable transformation. The soil itself seemed bound to the pact of the twins. Crops grew taller, thicker, more fertile than any farmer had ever seen, but only in the fields the brothers blessed with their presence. Streams ran clearer, fish multiplied, and yet, for those who defied the pact, famine struck like a curse. Entire families wasted away while their neighbors feasted, the land itself dividing according to loyalty. By 1872, the valley no longer resembled a mountain hamlet. It had become a closed world, a kingdom of two. The twins enforced no laws, yet everyone obeyed. They appointed no sheriff, no preacher, no mayor, Yet every decision in the hollow was filtered through them. It was not democracy. It was not tyranny. It was something older, something tribal, primal, ritualistic. People gave willingly because they feared losing everything if they withheld. And in that fear, the pact spread, binding the community in chains, as invisible as air. Travelers noticed. Traders passing through described a place where no one spoke without glancing over their shoulder, where every child seemed pale and watchful, where hymns sung in church contained words no outsider recognized. Outsiders left quickly, or vanished before they could. Those who managed to escape told of midnight gatherings where the entire community stood in silence around the twins, torches raised, waiting for them to speak as though their words were scripture. And when they finally spoke, it was always together. Not like two boys taking turns, but as one voice split between two mouths. Their tones matched perfectly, layered over each other like an echo that didn't belong in this world. Witnesses described their words as hypnotic, breaking the will of the listener, filling them with both dread and longing. What began as a pact of blood between siblings had now become a pact of power over a people. This is how corruption thrives, not through force, but through seduction. Give men prosperity, give them health, give them survival, and they will kneel, and once they kneel, they do not rise again. The valley was no longer just haunted, it was bound. The twins had become not only rulers, but symbols of something far more dangerous, the fusion of blood and belief, body and soul, power and devotion. The community was no longer separate families, it was a single organism, pulsing to the rhythm of two hearts that beat as one. The hollow could not remain invisible forever. By 1873, stories of the valley reached beyond the ridgelines, rumors carried by peddlers, whispers written in coded letters, warnings scratched into the margins of parish records. The outside world may have scoffed at tales of blood-bonded twins, but the institutions that guard power do not laugh at anomalies. They investigate them, they measure them, they decide whether to absorb them or erase them. The first to respond was the church. A quiet delegation of itinerant priests arrived in the valley, men carrying no crosses, only leather-bound satchels filled with censored scripture and sealed letters from Rome. Their mission was not salvation, it was containment. They sought to study the twins, to determine if their power could be bent to the service of the Vatican, or if they should be branded heresy and burned from the earth. But the priests never returned. Their carriage was later found on the mountain pass, horses alive but foaming with terror, reins torn as if from a desperate struggle. The satchels were gone. Then came the state. Government men from Richmond, wearing uniforms without insignias, rode into the hollow under orders of population census. They carried maps, rifles, and the quiet arrogance of those who believed no backwoods boy could resist their authority. They were never seen again. The only trace was a rusting bayonet discovered months later near the river, its blade twisted as if by impossible force. But most disturbing were the ones who came last, those without country, without church, without uniform. They were men from secret orders, the kind who deal not in armies, but in symbols, codes, and ancient texts. Their presence is recorded only in a handful of diaries belonging to families who later fled the mountains. Tall men in long coats, marked with rings of serpents biting their tails, stood at the edge of the gatherings, watching, waiting. They did not intervene. They observed. Because they knew what most of the world refuses to believe, that the twins represented not an isolated anomaly, but a dangerous key. A key to something older, a principle that could either enslave or liberate entire nations if understood. What those men feared was not witchcraft. It was the mirror. Two beings made one, reflecting endlessly into each other, creating a unity so unbreakable that no crown, no creed, no government could divide it. And if such unity could be replicated, imagine what would happen to the empires built on division. The true horror of this story is not what others saw in the twins. It is what the twins began to see in themselves. By 1874, they no longer behaved like boys, nor even like men. They carried themselves as something outside of human category. They spoke less to others and more to each other, but those who overheard swore their words were not of any earthly tongue, a mixture of guttural German, ancient Gaelic, and something else, syllables that felt wrong in the mouth, words that seemed to bend the air when spoken aloud. And the changes were not only linguistic. Their bodies altered. Villagers said their skin glowed faintly under moonlight, as if veins ran with silver. When one twin was cut in a hunting accident, no blood spilled. The wound closed instantly, leaving only a pale scar. Some claimed the brothers ceased aging entirely, their features freezing in a terrible symmetry. They looked like statues carved from the same block of flesh, identical down to every eyelash, every pore. The people of the valley, once fearful, began to worship. Offerings were left at their cabin door, bread, coins, animal hearts. Some women offered themselves, desperate to bear children touched by the Pact. But those children never lived past birth, their eyes fused shut, their cries weak, as if the world itself rejected their existence. Yet still, the people believed. They whispered that the twins had become vessels of an older force, a god that demanded union above all else. One night, in the clearing where their blood had first been bound, the brothers addressed their followers. Torches lit the forest in gold and shadow. Every villager stood silent, waiting. And for the first time, the twins admitted the truth. The voice that spoke through them was not their own. It came from beneath the mountain, from deep stone chambers no man had entered in centuries. It called itself the Mirror Without End. The villagers trembled, yet none dared flee. The brothers promised that if the people bound themselves as the twins had bound each other, if they abandoned division, surrendered individuality, and became one organism, they too would share in eternal power, survival, dominion, the end of fear. And this is where you must pause, because the lesson is not confined to a mountain hollow in 1874. The same voice speaks still, to governments, to corporations, to institutions that demand you think alike, act alike, obey alike. They sell you unity, but what they mean is control. By 1875, the hollow was no longer a village, it was a hive. Families who once quarreled over land or inheritance now lived as if bound by invisible chains, their individuality dissolved into the will of the Pact. Arguments vanished. Disobedience ceased. Smiles stretched wider, but behind them was only a hollow calm, the kind that grows when men have surrendered not just their freedom, but their thoughts. The transformation did not happen overnight. It began with the ritual. The twins declared that each family must reenact the Pact, cutting their palms, pressing the wounds together, reciting the vow they had spoken in their youth. At first, people hesitated, but hesitation did not last long. A farmer who refused was found days later hanging from a tree, his body untouched by decay, his eyes wide open, staring toward the twins' cabin as if still begging for approval. After that, no one resisted. Soon, the rituals expanded. Couples no longer spoke of marriage, they spoke of mirroring. Two became one, not in love, but in obedience. Children were raised not as individuals, but as extensions of the whole, drilled to answer questions in unison, to walk in step, to never say I, only we. Outsiders who stumbled upon the community described an eerie harmony, dozens of voices chanting as one, dozens of faces turning in perfect synchronization, dozens of hearts beating in unison with the twins' impossible rhythm. But unity, as preached by the twins, came at a cost. Those who faltered, Those who struggled to keep their words aligned, whose hearts did not sync with the rhythm, were returned to the mountain. That was the phrase, returned. No one saw where they were taken, but travelers spoke of muffled screams echoing from caves at night, and of strange lights flickering deep underground. Here lies the danger. What began as survival had become something far darker, psychological, fusion. Individuality erased, choice dissolved, the human mind bent until it no longer resisted. The people of the Hollow were not living. They were extensions of the Pact, puppets of a force that thrived on sameness. And doesn't that sound familiar? Institutions today dress it in new clothes. They call it collectivism, compliance, consensus, safety. But the principle is the same. Erase the man, replace him with the mass. One thought, one rhythm, one voice. Pause here, because this is where you, watching this, must choose. Are you the farmer who resists and hangs? Or are you the one who bleeds, chants, and kneels? By 1876, the Hollow was no longer enough. The twins began to speak of the outer world with a hunger that unsettled even their most loyal followers. They told their people that the Pact could not remain confined to a single valley, that the Union must spread or it would wither. And so emissaries were chosen. Pairs of villagers, bound by blood and vow, sent down the mountains into nearby towns. At first it was subtle. A pair of merchants began appearing at markets, always together, always speaking in perfect unison, selling goods for half their worth, then demanding only loyalty in return. Two women arrived at a church, knelt in identical fashion, and sang hymns in voices so harmonized they seemed to echo through the rafters long after the sound had stopped. Farmers in outlying fields reported seeing strangers standing at the edge of their land at dusk, always in pairs, always silent, always watching. The effect was immediate. Some townsfolk were unsettled, others were seduced. A few even followed the emissaries back into the Hollow, abandoning homes and kin to become part of the Union. Slowly, the Pact was seeding itself beyond the ridgelines, like a fungus stretching its tendrils under the soil, unseen until too late. But this expansion could not go unnoticed. Reports began reaching higher circles, governors, bishops, and most importantly, those secret orders that had already marked the twins as dangerous. Letters intercepted from that era reveal coded warnings. The mirror spreads. The hive is awakening. Intervention is required. And so the watchers returned. Not priests this time, not census men, but hunters. Operatives of hidden societies who specialized in erasing anomalies before they destabilized entire regions. They came with relics, with ancient weapons, with symbols etched into steel that only they understood. Their mission was simple: shatter the Pact before it spread any further. But the hunters underestimated what they were facing. They believed they were confronting two boys with unnatural gifts. What they found was an entire valley bound by blood, speaking as one, moving as one, fighting as one. When the hunters fired rifles, it was not the twins who bled. It was nameless villagers who stepped forward willingly, absorbing the bullets with blank devotion. This was no longer about two brothers. It was about a force that had rewritten an entire community's reality. A hive bound not by chains, but by choice. And when you see that, you begin to understand the true weapon of power. Not the gun, not the sword, but obedience disguised as unity. The hunters knew brute force would fail. By winter of 1876, their rifles had emptied, their knives had dulled, and still the Hollow stood unbroken. Every villager fought not as themselves, but as extensions of the twins. Strike one, and another would rise. Shoot one, and another would step forward without hesitation. It was not war. It was drowning in a tide of bodies who no longer cared if they lived or died, because their will had been erased. So the hunters changed tactics. They sought the source. The pact, they reasoned, was not sustained by ritual alone, but by something deeper, an anchor. Legends spoke of chambers beneath the mountain, caverns older than human memory, where voices echoed that did not belong to the living. If the twins were vessels, then the origin of their power lay there. And so, in secret, under the cover of storm, the hunters descended into the caves. What they found was recorded only once, scratched into the margins of a stolen field journal, hidden in code. It described walls covered in symbols that predated language, spirals carved so deep they seemed to pulse, to breathe. In the center of the chamber was a mirror, but not of glass. It was stone polished so perfectly it reflected not light, but something else. An endless tunnel of faces staring back, all identical, all fused, all silent. The twins were waiting for them there. They did not fight. They only stood side by side, hands clasped, and spoke in that same impossible unison. We are not two. We are the mirror without end. The hunters raised their weapons, but before they could fire, their reflections in the stone began to move on their own. The mirror doubled them, then tripled them, until the cavern was filled with 1,000 versions of themselves, all staring back, all grinning with madness. Some hunters fired only to kill their own men. Others fled into the dark and never returned. And the few who survived clawed their way out of the cave at dawn, their hair turned white, their minds shattered. One survivor wrote a final warning before taking his own life. The twins are not the beginning. They are the doorway. The mirror feeds on union. The more who join, the stronger it becomes. It cannot be destroyed. It can only spread. And this is where you must see clearly. The pact of the twins was not a curse, not even a blessing. It was a contagion, psychological, spiritual, eternal. And history has been careful to bury every trace of it. By 1878, the hollow was no longer a valley of men. It was a tomb of obedience. The twins had disappeared from sight, leaving only their mark, an entire community fused into a single organism of fear and ritual. Families no longer moved individually. They walked in tandem, spoke in choruses, and offered their children as vessels to the mirror. Travelers who stumbled upon the hollow later described a silence so complete it was suffocating, broken only by distant whispers that seemed to repeat their own thoughts back at them. But the twins' absence did not mean the pact had ended. On the contrary, it had evolved. With the masters gone, the followers became priests of the union. They continued the rituals, reenacted the blood oaths, and passed the knowledge to anyone who was willing or compelled to join. The valley became a self-sustaining machine of obedience. The pact no longer required its creators. It required only faith, repetition, and fear. Some tried to escape. Young couples fled at night, carrying whatever they could, only to be hunted down by those they had once called neighbors. Mothers and fathers recited the vow to their children, even as the children begged to run, and the children complied. Every act of resistance was absorbed, converted, and recycled into the system. There was no rebellion, only integration. Yet the tragedy of the hollow was not in the obedience, it was in the spread. Some families, seeking fertile land or new opportunity, moved beyond the mountains, carrying the rituals, the whispers, and the psychological framework of the pact. They arrived in towns, in cities, and quietly established influence, passing on practices disguised as religion, tradition, or custom. The mirror moved silently into new hearts, new minds, new generations. And here is the lesson for you, listening now. What began as two boys with a pact is still alive, still propagating, still shaping the world. It does not need blood to survive, it needs replication. It grows in families, organizations, governments, corporations. Anywhere division is erased in favor of unity. Anywhere loyalty is demanded in exchange for survival. anywhere fear is worshipped as faith. The hollow is gone, but its principle is eternal. The mirror, without end, does not die. It only waits for the next mind, the next will, the next union to consume. And now, if you feel the weight of this knowledge, pause and comment below. The mirror sees me. Type it twice. Seal your recognition. Align yourself with awareness. This is no ritual of magic. It is a ritual of clarity, marking you as awake to truths most men will never see. Containment was always the goal. By the late 1800s, the hollow had become a whispered warning in the records of institutions too powerful to admit their own fear. The church, the state, and the secret orders did not destroy the mirror. They studied it. They could not risk annihilating something they did not understand. And so they did what all empires do with dangerous knowledge. They absorbed it, disguised it, and deployed it. The first step was erasure. Maps of the region were redrawn, valleys renamed, records falsified. The community was relocated under the guise of public safety, its people scattered into work camps, orphanages, and military outposts. The official story said the town had been abandoned due to famine and disease. But fragments of personal letters, hidden in trunks and attic boxes, told another tale, of a forced exodus, of strange symbols carved into government crates, of men in black coats whispering prayers that were not Christian over the seized belongings. The second step was adaptation. The mirror's principles, union through fear, identity erased into obedience, ritual as control, were not buried. They were extracted, codified, and fed into the design of institutions. Early boarding schools for troubled children mimicked the hollow's chants. Experimental military programs taught soldiers to march, think, and act as one, breaking individuality to forge unbreakable cohesion. Secret fraternities at elite universities adopted rites eerily similar to the twins' vow, reciting oaths by candlelight, binding brothers not by friendship, but by something much deeper. And as decades passed, the technique became invisible. Modern institutions speak of team culture, collective alignment, brand loyalty, the greater good. The language has changed, but the engine is the same. Erase the man, replace him with the mass. Feed on the surrender of individuality. Call it progress. Call it unity. But at its core, it is the mirror without end, echoing through boardrooms, war rooms, and classrooms alike. You were never supposed to know this. You were meant to feel it, to live inside it without question. But here you are, listening, aware. You can see the pattern now. Look at the systems around you, the slogans, the rituals, the unspoken demands. Ask yourself, whose rhythm are you beating to? Because the mirror doesn't need a mountain, it doesn't need twins, it only needs compliance. And every time a man surrenders his will for safety, every time he trades his I for we without question, the mirror grows stronger. Now listen closely. This is the truth they never wanted you to see, the final piece of the puzzle. The twins, the hollow, the mirror without end, it was never about them. It was about you, about every man who obeys without question, who bends his mind to fit the pattern, who sacrifices his soul for comfort or conformity. The twins were a warning, a model, a prism through which the machinery of power could be understood. The mirror lives in every institution that asks you to surrender your identity. It thrives in families, workplaces, governments, and religions. It does not care for morality, law, or decency. It feeds on unity, on obedience, on the willing erasure of the self. And the more you see it, the more you resist it, the more power it grants you in reverse. Because awareness is the first step to liberation. The hollow may have disappeared from the Appalachian Mountains, but its principle has spread. Every ritual, every code, every system built to align men's thoughts and bend their wills is a shadow of that ancient pact. And now, you know, You can see it in the headlines, in corporate culture, in the subtle psychological currents that shape loyalty, belief, and action. You are awake to it. You understand the danger. You can choose to resist. Do not be deceived by the comfort of unity. Do not fall into the trap of conformity disguised as safety. The twins' lesson is clear. Power is never neutral. Power always flows through the willing. And the only way to survive the mirror is to remain unbroken, unaligned, unclaimed, to walk as an individual in a world that demands you disappear. Remember this. The pact is not dead. It only waits. Every man who sacrifices his mind to the rhythm of another becomes another reflection in the mirror. And every reflection strengthens the unseen force that has shaped history since the first covenant of the twins. You are no longer ignorant. You have seen what others never will. You have walked the ridgelines of forbidden knowledge and felt the pulse of something eternal, something uncontainable. And now it is your choice. Submit or stand. Stand, and you carry the memory of the hollow inside you, a constant warning, a compass in a world designed to erase the self. Type it one last time, if you have not already. The mirror sees me, twice. Seal your awareness. Let it mark you, because once you know, you cannot unknow. And once you see, the world will never be the same again.